Picture this. It's the year 2050. We live in a world brimming with possibility. Clean energy powers our cities. Desalination plants provide abundant fresh water to formerly arid regions. mRNA vaccines, tailored to individual cancers, are commonplace, and artificial intelligence is unlocking scientific breakthroughs at an unimaginable pace. Sounds incredible, right? Almost utopian. Now, snap back to today. As a leader, an executive, an entrepreneur, how does it feel? Does it feel like we're rocketing towards that abundant future? Or does it feel stuck, bogged down? Why are housing costs spiraling out of reach in our most prosperous cities? Why does building essential infrastructure, like clean energy projects needed to combat climate change, feel like wading through concrete? Why does healthcare become less, not more, accessible for so many? Despite breathtaking medical advances, why does progress, the kind that genuinely improves lives at scale, feel so damn hard when the potential seems higher than ever? This jarring disconnect between the shimmering possibilities promised by technology and innovation and the frustrating realities of gridlock, scarcity, and slow progress is precisely where Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson step in with their paradigm-shifting book, Abundance, The Politics of Possibility. And welcome to CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf, where we distill the most powerful ideas from essential books for leaders like you. Today, we're diving deep into abundance because it offers a critical diagnosis, not just of societal problems, but of the systemic failures that actively hinder progress, failures that directly impact the environments in which all leaders operate. This isn't just another political lament. Klein and Thompson argue forcefully that much of the scarcity we experience in housing, energy, healthcare, even innovation itself, isn't an inevitable consequence of nature or economics. It's a choice, a result of decades of political decisions, policy failures, and deeply ingrained systemic flaws across both the left and the right. Over the next 30 minutes, we'll unpack this provocative thesis. We'll explore, first, how well-intentioned policies often create the very scarcities they aim to solve. Second, we'll investigate why building anything significant, from homes to green energy infrastructure, has become agonizingly difficult and expensive in America. Third, we'll uncover the hidden crisis stifling the kind of breakthrough scientific innovation we desperately need. And finally, crucially, we'll discuss the mindset shift required, moving away from merely managing scarcity towards actively, strategically building abundance. This episode won't just diagnose the problems, it will equip you with frameworks to identify and overcome these barriers within your own organizations and spheres of influence, helping you lead more effectively in a world desperately needing solutions. Let's get started. Why is it that some of the wealthiest, most technologically advanced, and politically progressive cities in America, places like San Francisco, Los Angeles, or Seattle, often grapple most visibly with problems like crippling housing costs, pervasive homelessness, and strained infrastructure? These are cities led by people who, by their own values, should be succeeding at providing basic public goods. Yet, as Klein and Thompson chronicle, they are often failing, even by liberal metrics. What on earth has gone wrong? The core insight from abundance here is startling. This isn't primarily a failure of resources, or even necessarily of intentions. It's often a case of chosen scarcity, a predicament born from decades of policies piling up, often with noble goals, but ultimately creating perverse outcomes. Think about housing. In many desirable cities, efforts that began decades ago to preserve neighborhood character, prevent unsightly sprawl, or protect environmental aesthetics led to increasingly restrictive zoning laws and complex approval processes. The intention might have been good. Nobody wants uncontrolled development or environmental destruction, but the cumulative effect, it became incredibly difficult, slow, and expensive to build new homes, especially dense, multifamily housing. Supply couldn't keep up with demand, turning vibrant cities into exclusive, high-priced luxury goods, what the authors vividly termed cities of amber, preserved but stagnant. To compounding this is what Klein and Thompson identify as a shift in focus, particularly within liberalism, towards process over outcomes. Driven by a desire for fairness, inclusion, and environmental protection, layers upon layers of reviews, community input sessions, and legal checks were added to decision-making. Again, each step often seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they created a system riddled with veto points, countless opportunities for small, well-organized groups, sometimes called NIMBYs not in my backyard activists, to delay or kill projects that would benefit the broader community. This creates a dynamic the authors call symbolic liberalism versus operational conservatism. Progressive values are espoused, but the actual system makes significant change, especially building things nearly impossible. Furthermore, there's been a consistent political tendency, particularly on the left, to address problems by subsidizing demand without adequately tackling supply. Think housing vouchers, mortgage interest deductions, or first-time homebuyer credits. These might help some individuals in the short term, but if the number of available houses isn't increasing, these subsidies primarily just get baked into higher prices, benefiting existing property owners rather than solving the underlying affordability crisis. It's like trying to cool a fever by giving everyone money to buy thermometers. It doesn't address the root cause. So, what's the application for you as a leader? It requires turning this diagnostic lens inward towards your own organization or sphere. Are there legacy rules, procedures, or deeply ingrained cultural norms within your company that were initially created for good reasons, perhaps risk mitigation, quality control, or stakeholder consultation, but now actively hinder your primary strategic goals? Are you measuring success based on adherence to process, or are you ruthlessly focused on achieving desired outcomes? How often do well-intentioned internal policies designed to perfect one aspect of the business inadvertently create bottlenecks or scarcity elsewhere, maybe slowing down product launches, hindering cross-functional collaboration, or making it harder to hire key talent? Abundance urges us to constantly evaluate our systems, not just by their intentions or their procedural elegance, but by their real-world results. Are you, perhaps unintentionally, creating your own forms of chosen scarcity within the very systems you lead? It's a critical question worth asking. Let's talk about building things. Big things, important things. The climate crisis, arguably the defining challenge of our time, demands an unprecedented mobilization, a massive build-out of clean energy infrastructure like solar farms, wind turbines, geothermal plants, and the transmission lines to connect them all. The exciting part is that the core technologies, like solar panels and wind turbines, are cheaper and more efficient than ever. We have the tools, yet actually deploying them at the scale and speed required feels Herculean, especially in the United States. Contrast the slow, often litigious progress on projects like California's high-speed rail, or the difficulty in permitting cross-state transmission lines with the staggering pace of infrastructure development seen in countries like China. Why has America, the nation that built the Hoover Dam and the interstate highway system, become so slow, so expensive, and so gridlocked when it comes to building essential things? Abundance argues this isn't a single problem, but a multi-layered knot. One major factor is the regulatory maze we've constructed. Environmental protection laws like the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, and state-level equivalents like California's CEQA were originally designed in the 1960s and 70s to stop genuinely harmful projects, think polluting factories near communities or highways paving over critical habitats. They empowered citizens and environmental groups to challenge government decisions, forcing agencies to rigorously study impacts. But over time, these laws, interpreted and expanded through litigation, have become powerful tools to obstruct almost any large project, including the very green energy and transit projects needed to combat climate change. The process itself, endless environmental impact statements, legal challenges, layers of permits from different agencies, can take years, even decades, and add astronomical costs, often killing projects before a single shovel hits the ground. What was designed as a shield against harm has morphed into a barrier against progress. Then there's the stark reality of construction itself. Unlike manufacturing, where productivity has soared thanks to automation and process improvements, construction productivity in the United States has actually fallen since the 1970s. Klein and Thompson point to factors like increasing project complexity driven partly by regulation, difficulties in adopting new technologies and methods, and industry fragmentation. Many small firms struggle to achieve economies of scale or invest heavily in innovation. Building big things has simply gotten harder and less efficient. Finally, the authors diagnose a phenomenon they call everything bagel liberalism. This is the tendency, again often born from good intentions, to load up essential projects with numerous secondary goals. A new transit line isn't just about moving people efficiently, it might also have requirements for specific percentages of local hiring, quotas for small or minority-owned subcontractors, elaborate aesthetic design reviews, commitments to use particular building materials, and so on. Each additional goal adds complexity, cost, and potential delay. Think of affordable housing projects that become prohibitively expensive because of complex funding streams and excessive design mandates, or even the CHIPS Act, designed to boost semiconductor manufacturing, getting laden with requirements beyond the core mission. When every project has to solve every problem, essential projects often become too costly, too slow, or simply don't happen at all. The leadership takeaway here is the critical importance of becoming, as the book suggests, a bottleneck detective. What specifically is slowing down the most critical initiatives in your domain? Don't just accept delays as inevitable. Dig into the process. Can you apply a principle of triage? This means relentlessly focusing resources and political capital on achieving the primary goal of a project, even if it means simplifying or deferring secondary objectives. We saw the power of this focused approach during the remarkably rapid rebuild of the collapsed I-95 bridge in Philadelphia in 2023. Faced with a clear crisis, regulations were streamlined, interagency cooperation was mandated, and the focus was laser-sharp: get the bridge reopened, fast. Leaders need to ask what rules, processes, or secondary goals can be simplified, streamlined, or even temporarily waived when speed and achieving the core mission are paramount. It requires political courage and a willingness to challenge the status quo, but it's essential if we want to build the future we need. Consider the story of Katalin Kariko. For decades, she toiled in relative obscurity, facing grant rejections and demotions, relentlessly pursuing her conviction that messenger RNA, or mRNA, could be harnessed to instruct human cells to fight disease. Her breakthroughs were foundational to the rapid development of the COVID-19 vaccines that saved countless lives. Yet, her struggle exemplifies a profound challenge highlighted in abundance. Why does a scientific ecosystem supposedly designed to foster breakthroughs seem increasingly biased against risky, unconventional, paradigm-shifting ideas? And relatedly, why does government itself, the entity often responsible for funding basic science and implementing large-scale solutions, often seem so ineffective and incapable? Klein and Thompson diagnose what they term the carry-core problem. Our dominant model for funding science, particularly through institutions like the National Institutes of Health (NIH), relies heavily on peer review for allocating grants. While intended to ensure quality, this system often favors incremental research, projects that promise safe, predictable progress within established paradigms. Truly novel or unconventional ideas, like Carico's early mRNA work, often struggle to get funding because they challenge existing dogma, lack extensive preliminary data, or simply sound too risky to reviewers worried about their own reputations. The sheer administrative burden of grant applications, what the authors call grantsmanship, also consumes vast amounts of researchers' time, diverting energy from actual discovery. The result is a system that, despite massive investment, may be becoming too conservative, too bureaucratic, and too slow to deliver the kind of fundamental breakthroughs we need for challenges like climate change, Alzheimer's disease, or future pandemics. We need more experimentation with funding models, perhaps drawing inspiration from DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, which empowers program managers to make bold bets on high-risk, high-reward projects, or the legendary Bell Labs of the past, which provided long-term security and fostered cross-disciplinary collaboration. The book calls for more meta-science, the science of how we do science, to optimize our innovation engine. This ties directly into the broader issue of state capacity, the sheer ability of the government to effectively execute its tasks, implement policies, and achieve its goals. Klein and Thompson argue that American state capacity is worryingly weak. One major culprit is adversarial legalism, the tendency for policy, disputes, and project approvals to get endlessly bogged down in litigation. Another is the process fetishism we discussed earlier, where adhering to procedures becomes more important than achieving outcomes. We also see chronic issues like understaffing in key government agencies, leading to an over-reliance on expensive external consultants who may lack deep institutional knowledge or long-term accountability. The California high-speed rail project is a prime example. Funding is often fragmented across multiple agencies with overlapping or conflicting missions, making coordinated action incredibly difficult. Consider the complex web of agencies trying to tackle homelessness in Los Angeles, and sometimes government simply struggles to modernize basic functions like the Employment Development Department, ED in California, buckling under the strain of pandemic unemployment claims due to outdated technology. What are the leadership lessons here? Within your own organization, how can you foster a culture that consciously balances the need for incremental improvements with dedicated support for potentially transformative, higher-risk projects? Can you create sandboxes for experimentation? Can you simplify internal funding or approval processes to free up your innovators and reduce bureaucratic drag? When interacting with government or navigating large, complex systems, it's crucial to understand these inherent biases towards process, risk aversion, and fragmented authority. How can you build more internal capacity and expertise within your teams, reducing over-reliance on external vendors for core functions? Critically, how can you advocate for and implement within your own scope clear goals, empowered decision-makers, and accountability based on results, not just procedural compliance? Building abundance requires not only generating new ideas, but also having the systems and the capacity, both public and private, to effectively execute them. America invented the solar cell. American scientists pioneered nuclear power. Much of the foundational research for the lithium-ion batteries powering our devices and electric vehicles happened here. Yet, why did the United States largely lose leadership in manufacturing and deploying these world-changing technologies at scale? Why are China and other nations often far ahead in building solar farms, nuclear plants, and battery factories? Consider the contrast Klein and Thompson draw. During World War II, America rapidly scaled up production and deployment of penicillin, a life-saving invention, demonstrating incredible industrial and logistical prowess. Yet, solar power, despite its obvious benefits, languished for decades before achieving widespread, affordable deployment. Why is the gap between a brilliant invention, the eureka moment, and its broad impactful use in society often so vast and difficult to bridge? Abundance underscores that deployment is not an afterthought. It's a distinct and critical challenge requiring focused strategy, investment, and effective execution. Invention is not enough. Getting technology out of the lab and into the world at scale involves overcoming a whole new set of obstacles: manufacturing bottlenecks, supply chain vulnerabilities, regulatory hurdles specific to deployment, infrastructure needs, workforce training, and consumer adoption challenges. The book highlights Operation Warp Speed, WS, the U.S. government's initiative to accelerate COVID-19 vaccine development and distribution, as a powerful, albeit imperfect, example of successful deployment strategy. What made OWS work relatively well? Klein and Thompson point to several key factors. First, it had a single crystal-clear goal: deliver safe and effective vaccines as quickly as possible. This focus prevented mission creep. Second, the government acted aggressively as a bottleneck detective, proactively identifying and addressing problems across the entire value chain, funding research, coordinating clinical trials, investing in manufacturing capacity before vaccines were even approved, and planning logistics for distribution. Third, it made extensive use of pull mechanisms, particularly advance market commitments, AMCs. By guaranteeing purchase orders for successful vaccines, the government significantly de-risked the massive private investment needed for rapid scaling. This AMC model is now being proposed for other critical technologies facing deployment hurdles like carbon removal or clean cement production. This focus on deployment highlights emerging bottlenecks for future progress. The authors note, for instance, how the rapid rise of artificial intelligence is creating an enormous new demand for electricity that needs to be clean and abundant if AI is to fulfill its potential without exacerbating the climate crisis. Building the necessary clean power generation and transmission infrastructure is now a critical deployment challenge directly linked to harnessing the future of AI. Furthermore, successful deployment often requires significant in-house expertise within government agencies to manage complex contracts, coordinate logistics, and make swift, informed decisions, something often lacking due to outsourcing and understaffing. For leaders, the crucial takeaway is to think systematically about the entire journey from idea to impact. Don't just focus on research and development. What are the specific deployment bottlenecks for your most critical initiatives or new products? Are they in manufacturing, supply chain, regulation, go-to-market strategy, customer education, or required infrastructure? How can you create internal pull incentives within your organization to accelerate the adoption and scaling of promising innovations? Are you proactively ensuring that the necessary enabling infrastructure, whether it's data infrastructure, specialized talent, physical facilities, or even energy supply, is in place before it becomes a critical bottleneck? Can you adopt an Operation Warp Speed mindset for your most vital projects, appointing a dedicated team with clear authority to identify and systematically remove every obstacle standing in the way of successful deployment? Mastering this final mile is often the difference between a brilliant idea that fizzles out and one that truly changes the game. So, let's bring it all together. Over the past 30 minutes, exploring the core arguments of abundance by Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, we've journeyed through a critical diagnosis of why progress on some of our biggest challenges feels so stalled. We've seen how scarcity in housing, clean energy, healthcare access, even innovation, is often not inevitable, but a choice, frequently stemming from the unintended consequences of well-meaning but flawed policies and systems. We've grappled with the concept of vetocracy, where endless process and veto points paralyze our ability to build necessary things. We've critiqued everything bagel liberalism, the tendency to overload essential projects with secondary goals until they collapse under their own weight. We've confronted the Carico problem, highlighting how our innovation systems can stifle breakthrough ideas. We've recognized that the eureka moment of invention is not enough. We need robust state capacity and effective deployment strategies to translate ideas into widespread impact. But abundance is not just a diagnosis. It's fundamentally a call for a new approach, a new mindset. The shift towards abundance isn't merely a matter of electing different politicians or tweaking specific policies, though those things matter. It requires a fundamental change in how we, as leaders, approach problems. It means challenging the default no, the path of least resistance that often favors inaction or incrementalism. It demands actively asking, how can we build this? How can we solve this? It means becoming relentless bottleneck detectives, identifying and removing the specific obstacles that impede progress in our organizations and communities. It requires ruthless prioritization, focusing intensely on core missions rather than letting secondary goals dilute effort and resources. It necessitates embracing experimentation, not just in products and services, but in processes, structures, and even how we fund innovation. Ultimately, Klein and Thompson urge us to see abundance not just as a desirable outcome, but as a deliberate strategy for navigating the complexities and unlocking the potential of the 21st century. It's about making conscious choices to build more, faster, and better, whether it's housing, clean energy, scientific knowledge, or organizational capacity. It's about reclaiming our agency to shape the future, rather than simply managing the scarcities imposed by outdated systems and thinking. So the final question for you is, where can you start building the abundant future you want to see? In your company, in your industry, in your community, perhaps even in your own life, the tools and insights are there. The choice and the challenge is ours. Thank you for joining us at CEO's Library, the 1% bookshelf. Until next time, keep reading, keep leading, and start building.